The Chinchorro mummies represent one of the most fascinating and enigmatic archaeological discoveries in South America. This ancient people, whose existence dates back approximately 9,000 years, developed complex mummification techniques that predate Egyptian ones by nearly 2,000 years. However, what is most intriguing is not only their age, but also their purpose and the meticulous workmanship of these bodies, which leave questions and challenges for archaeologists and historians to this day. Imagine the ancient Chinchorro inhabiting the arid shores of the Atacama Desert, a place so hostile that it barely allows life. Yet this civilization flourished on the shores of the Pacific Ocean in what is now northern Chile and southern Peru, facing a desolate environment with virtually no vegetation. So, what prompted these ancient inhabitants to develop such advanced techniques for preserving their dead? Mummies are often thought of as a legacy exclusive to Egyptian civilization, but the Chinchorro's method of preserving bodies is not only older, but also radically different. In ancient Egypt, mummification was reserved for the elite and royalty, who, according to their beliefs, needed to preserve their bodies for the afterlife. But in the case of the Chinchorro, mummification does not seem to be exclusive to royalty. Mummification includes the elderly, adults, young people, children, and even fetuses. This rare and unique aspect is unparalleled in any other mummification culture of the ancient world. The Chinchorro technique is undoubtedly one of the most complex mummification methods of antiquity. Their practices include two main methods: black mummification, dating back to approximately 5000 BC, and red mummification, around 2500 BC. In the black mummification process, the body was dismembered, its organs removed, and the skull cut and hollowed out. The bones were then reconstructed, and the limbs were reinforced with reeds for support, before being covered with a white ash paste that simulated skin. The final touch was the application of a black layer, possibly manganese, that covered the entire body. In contrast, the Egyptians developed less invasive embalming methods. These included the natural dehydration of bodies and the use of resins and bandages, but without the extreme structural reconstruction practiced by the Chinchorro. In Tenerife, the Guanches, a native people of the Canary Islands, also practiced mummification of their dead, albeit to a lesser extent, and using techniques reminiscent of Egyptian ones. However, unlike the Chinchorro, Guanche mummification was limited to figures of higher social status and generally did not include the meticulous restructuring of bodies, as did the peoples of the Chilean desert. Unlike other cultures, the Chinchorro left no written records or monuments to explain their motivations behind this laborious practice. This raises a big question. Why would a fishing culture, whose life revolved around the ocean, dedicate so much time and resources to mummifying their dead? One theory suggests that these preserved bodies served as ancestral presences, being revered and possibly carried with tribe members on their journeys. There is also speculation that they could have been part of an ancestor cult, where mummified bodies were placed in places of honor during ceremonies or used to strengthen the community's collective identity. Bernardo Arriaza, an anthropologist and one of the foremost scholars of the Chinchorro culture, suggests that this rite may have had an emotional origin. In his studies, Arriaza argues that the high infant mortality rate attributed to the consumption of arsenic-contaminated water may have been a catalyst for families to seek ways to preserve and honor their deceased children. The proportion of child mummies is considerably high in the finds from the region, which reinforces this theory. However, The lack of a clear religious or mythological context leaves a void that has intrigued scholars and remains unsolved. Another mystery surrounds the natural preservation that the Atacama desert climate allowed for these mummies. Unlike Egyptian tombs, which were built in temples and protected from the outside environment, the Chinchorro mummies were buried in shallow graves. The extreme aridity and soil composition allowed for partial natural mummification before artificial techniques were applied. Thus, the combination of environment and artificial techniques created a unique preservation process not seen in other cultures. Could it have been this characteristic of the desert that inspired the Chinchorro to develop their elaborate mummification techniques? Or perhaps there was something deeper, a belief in the power of the earth itself, that led them to perpetuate these practices for thousands of years. Like Egyptian mummies, Chinchorro mummies reveal an obsession with preserving the body, although the reasons and methods differ significantly. However, some compare the detailed work of Chinchorro mummies to another type of ritual mummification in the Andes, such as the Inca mummies of children sacrificed in the Capacocha rituals. These mummies, found on mountaintops thousands of meters high, were preserved by extreme cold in a kind of natural mummification. Although the cultural contexts are different, both practices reflect a deep connection with the environment and a devotion to preserving the physical body, perhaps as a channel for the spirit. But while the Egyptians embalmed their dead for the journey to the afterlife, the reason why the Chinchorro preserved theirs remains a mystery. Some archaeologists suggest that Chinchorro mummification may have been a way to retain the dead among the living, maintaining them as a physical and tangible presence. Perhaps this ancient civilization believed that the dead could protect the living. Or perhaps it was a way to preserve the essence of their loved ones, keeping them ever present in the community. What secrets do these mummies hold? Decades ago, researchers discovered hundreds of naturally mummified bodies buried in boats in an arid desert in northwestern China. Dated to 4,000 years ago, the mummies' clothing and grave goods led some researchers to postulate that they were migrants from Western Asia. However, new DNA evidence published in the journal Nature suggests that the so-called Tarim mummies were actually directly descended from a population that inhabited the region during the Ice Age. Initially, the mummies' Western attire and European appearance led to the hypothesis that they were the remains of an Indo-European group of migrants with roots in Europe, perhaps related to Bronze Age herders in Siberia or farmers in what is now Iran. They had blonde, brown and red hair, large noses, and wore shiny, sometimes elaborate, clothing made of wool, fur or cowhide. Some wore pointed hats, similar to those worn by witches, and some of their clothing was made of felt or woven cloth, suggesting ties to Western European culture. Others wore plaid fabrics reminiscent of the Celts, most notably one of the mummies known as the Cherchan Man, who stood over 2 meters tall, had red hair and a full beard, and was buried over 1,000 years ago wearing a tartan kilt. Another of the most famous corpses is that of the so-called Princess, or Belle, of Zhaohe, a 3,800-year-old woman with light hair, high cheekbones, and long preserved eyelashes who appears to be smiling in death. Although she wore a large felt hat and fine clothes and even jewelry, it is unclear what position she may have held in her society. These bodies were not intentionally mummified as part of any funerary ritual. Rather, the dry, saline environment of the Tarim Basin, which contains the Taklamakan Desert, one of the largest in the world, allowed the bodies to decompose slowly and sometimes minimally. The area's extreme winter cold is also thought to have aided their preservation. According to the researchers, many bodies were buried in boat-shaped wooden coffins, covered with cattle hides and marked with wooden poles or oars. The discovery of the herb ephedra in the burials suggests it had a medical or religious significance, but it remains unclear what that religion might have been, nor why some burials included concentric rings of wooden stakes. The masks, twigs and animal bones found in the mummy cemeteries offer a tantalizing glimpse into their daily lives and rituals. Although most questions about their culture remain unanswered, the burials point to their diet and the fact that they were farmers. The mummies were buried with barley, millet and wheat, and even necklaces containing the oldest cheese ever found. This indicates that they not only engaged in agriculture, but also raised ruminant animals. The people of the Tarim Basin were genetically distinct, but their practices, from burial to cheese-making, and their clothing, which reflects techniques and crafts practiced in distant places at the time, seem to show that they mingled with and learned from other cultures, adopting their practices over time and incorporating them into a distinct civilization. Researchers now believe their daily lives ranged from ruminant husbandry to metalworking and basketry, contributed to by the fact that the now desolate desert of the Tarim Basin region was once much greener and had abundant fresh water. It is also believed that the inhabitants of the Tarim Basin traded and interacted with other peoples along what would eventually become a key Silk Road corridor, linking east and west across the arid desert. In 1995, Mayer stated that the earliest mummies in the Tarim Basin were exclusively Caucasian or Europoid, with East Asian immigrants arriving in the eastern parts of the Tarim Basin around 3,000 years ago, while the Uyghur people arrived around 842. In attempting to trace the origins of these populations, Victor Mayer's team suggested that they may have reached the region via the Pamir Mountains around 5,000 years ago. Mayer said the new findings also compel a re-examination of ancient Chinese books that describe historical or legendary figures of great stature, with deep blue or green eyes, long noses, bushy beards, and red or blonde hair. Scholars have traditionally scoffed at these accounts, but now it seems they may be accurate. In 2007, the Chinese government authorized a National Geographic Society team, led by Spencer Wells, to examine the mummy's DNA. Wells managed to extract undegraded DNA from the internal tissues. The scientists extracted enough material to suggest that the Tarim Basin was continuously inhabited from 2000 BC to 300 BC, and preliminary results indicate that the inhabitants, rather than having a single origin, came from Europe, Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, and other regions yet to be determined. It should be emphasized that all of these areas most likely have a common origin. That is, they descended from a single people in ancient times. The possible presence of Indo-European language speakers in the Tarim Basin around 2000 BCE could be interpreted as evidence that cultural exchanges occurred between Indo-European and Chinese populations at a very early date. It has been suggested that techniques such as chariot warfare and bronze making may have been transmitted eastward by these Indo-European nomads. Mallory and Mayer also note that Sidam. Before approximately 2000 BCE, metal artifacts found in cultures in the area that now corresponds to northwestern China are extremely rare, simple, and, curiously, already made of alloyed copper, and therefore questionable. Isolated for millennia beneath the relentless sand of the desert, the Tarim mummies give us a glimpse that doesn't quite fit with established narratives about Asia's past. Their bodies speak a language that defies simple categories. They carry traces of vanished cultures, of technologies and customs that traveled farther and earlier than we thought possible. And yet, we still don't know for sure who they were, where they came from, or what they knew of the world around them. Perhaps their greatest legacy is not what they tell us, but what they still compel us to ask. In the frozen depths of Siberia, beneath layers of eternal ice and forgotten earth, lie human bodies that have defied the passage of time. They are not legends, nor ghosts of history. They are real mummies, marked with ancient tattoos and shrouded in enigmas that science has yet to fully decipher. Who were these men and women who lived and died at the edges of the known world? What secrets do they carry in their skin, in their bones, in the objects that accompany them into eternity? The Pazyryk burials are a series of Iron Age Scythian tombs found in the Pazyryk Valley and the Ukok Plateau in the Altai Mountains, Siberia, south of the modern city of Novosibirsk, Russia. The site is close to the borders with China, Kazakhstan, and Mongolia. The bearers of the Pazyryk culture were nomadic, horse-riding steppe pastoralists, and some may have accumulated great wealth through horse trading with merchants from Persia, India, and China. This wealth is evident in the wide range of finds from these tombs, which include many rare examples of organic objects such as felt tapestries, Chinese silk, the earliest known pile carpet, horses dressed in elaborate harnesses, and wooden furniture and other household items. These finds were preserved when water seeped into the tombs in ancient times and froze, enclosing the grave goods in ice, which remained frozen in the permafrost until their excavation. Due to an exceptional climatic freeze, some Altai-Saiyan burials, particularly those from the 5th century BC at Pazyryk and neighboring sites such as Katanda, Shibay, and Twekta, were insulated from external climatic variations by a protective layer of ice that preserved the buried organic substances. Certain geometric designs and solar symbols, such as the circle and the rosette, are recurrent at Pazyryk, but animal motifs are completely superseded. Pazyryk Tomb No. 1 was excavated in the 1930s and houses numerous artifacts, including horses with deer antler masks and harnesses with human figures. The tomb dates from the 4th century BC. Its main contents were looted, but the area with horse sacrifices remained intact. Rudenko's most surprising discovery in 1947 was the body of a tattooed Pazyryk chieftain in Burial Mound 2, a large, powerfully built man, 176 centimeters tall, who had died when he was between 55 and 60 years old. His tomb was monumental and luxuriously appointed. He died violently, having been killed with a Scythian-type battle axe and scalped. He was carefully embalmed, and his body was covered with animal-style tattoos, but not his face. Parts of the body had deteriorated, but much of the tattooing was still clearly visible. Further investigation using reflected infrared photography revealed that all 5 bodies discovered in the Pazyryk kurgans were tattooed. The chief was elaborately decorated with an intertwined series of striking designs depicting a variety of fantastic beasts. The best preserved tattoos were images of a donkey, a mountain ram, 2 highly stylized deer with long antlers, and an imaginary carnivore on the right arm. 2 griffin-like monsters decorate the chest, and on the left arm are 3 partially erased images that appear to represent 2 deer and a mountain goat. On the front of the right leg, a fish extends from the foot to the knee. A monster crawls on the right foot, and on the inside of the shin is a series of 4 running rams touching each other to form a single design. The left leg also has tattoos, but these designs could not be clearly distinguished. In addition, the chief's back is tattooed with a series of small circles in line with the spine. His embalmed head, now in the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg, suggests a rather Mongolian type. He was crowned with a gilded copper tiara decorated with 6 winged, antlered and hoofed lions, lion griffins. The lion griffins were made of wood, but were originally covered with gold leaf before being looted by grave robbers. A false beard, made of hair, sinew and leather, was also discovered next to him in his tomb. Its significance remains conjectural, as all the mummies recovered from Pazyryk were completely shaved. Pazyryk Burial Mound 5 also contained the remains of a Saka chief. The tomb consisted of an inner and outer log sarcophagus covered with 5 layers of logs and a layer of boulders. The tomb was looted in ancient times, but still contained the embalmed remains of a man and a woman, along with some artifacts: 9 horses, either harnessed to a chariot or mounted on its back, an unarmed chariot with 4 large spoked wheels and several carpets. The most famous intact Pazyryk burial recovered to date is that of the Ice Maiden, or Lady of Altai, found in 1993 at Ukok, near the Chinese border. The find was a rare example of a single woman given a full ceremonial burial in a wooden chamber tomb in the 5th century BC, accompanied by 6 horses. She was buried over 2,400 years ago in a coffin made from the hollowed-out trunk of a Siberian larch tree. On the outside of the coffin were stylized images of deer and snow leopards carved from leather. Shortly after the burial, the tomb was apparently flooded by freezing rain, and the entire contents of the burial chamber remained frozen in the permafrost. 6 elaborately harnessed horses were sacrificed and lay to the north of the chamber. The maiden's well-preserved body, carefully embalmed with peat and bark, was laid on its side as if asleep. She was young and her hair had been shaved, but she wore a wig and a tall hat. She stood 167 centimeters tall. Even animal tattoos were preserved on her pale skin, horned creatures that transform into flowers. Her coffin was designed large enough to accommodate the tall felt headdress she wore, decorated with carved swans and cats covered in gold. She wore a long woolen skirt, striped with white and crimson, and white felt stockings. Her yellow blouse was originally believed to be made of wild tussa silk, but closer examination of the fibers indicates that the material is not Chinese, but wild silk from elsewhere, perhaps India. Near her coffin were a yak horn vessel and plates with offerings of coriander seeds, all of which suggests that Pazyryk trade routes extended across vast areas of Iran. A facial reconstruction of the Princess of Ukok was created using her skull, in conjunction with measurements taken from the skull's facial features and skin thickness of present-day Altai inhabitants. The artist who created the reconstruction, Tanya Balweva, stated that the Princess of Ukok is a clear example of the Caucasian race without typically Mongolian features. However, Rima Eriknova, director of the Altai Regional Museum, did not want this to be known, commenting in a complaining tone, "They made the Princess of Ukok completely European." The critical reaction of a local authority trying to divert attention away from the traits of Indo-European peoples throughout the world reveals how such representations are not only scientific, they are also deeply political and emotional. What other research has been censored and even buried in oblivion for containing a part of history that some do not want to see the light of day? If there's one thing we can know, it's that the lands of what is now Russia hide truths that are still waiting to be discovered.